there's one uniting experience for low-income home educators, then I'm going to go with a soft play meetup. It's a hard one for me, not only because of the sweat and the noise and the headache and the usual terrible music. It's an expensive trip out with fairly little reward. For starters, you've usually got to find your way around some kind of industrial estate on the outskirts of a town centre to get there, and that is often very expensive and very time consuming if you don't have a car, or if you do, you've got to kind of commit the petrol costs for that. But for us, it might take an extra hour and a half to get there. We've got 3 buses, and then I'm pushing the pram and getting my kids round some empty industrial estate to find a soft play. Then obviously you've got to pay to get in, which even if you go at like happy hour or home ed happy hour, whatever it is, that starts to add up the more kids that you have or the older that they get. And then, and this for me is the worst, I've snuck food into a lot of places that technically you're supposed to buy food at, because it can be pricey and taking your own food is a good way of saving money. But soft play, you have to have like amazing levels of ingenuity to get away with it there, because there's usually some kind of 18-year-old loitering behind the till who can kind of spot your rustling crisp packet opening up and swoops down on you that you're not allowed to eat there. And yeah, then you've got to have the dilemma of, while other people are ordering the quite overpriced food, do you like stick to your guns and say, well, we've eaten beforehand, or we're going to have our food afterwards, when your kids, maybe it's just my kids, but the kind of pathetic, hungry look they get when someone else is having the pizza or the hot dogs and you're not, and they'll like bring on this look, even if you fed them just beforehand to try and stave off their hunger, they'll look at the other families, and then the other families start to feel awkward or embarrassed or just feeling very generous, and they're like, oh, they can have some, or do you want me to buy some for you? And then you feel like very awkward, or you scrape together the pennies to try and pay £7.50 for a slice of pizza. And it's hard to relax in those situations. I mean, soft play for me is slightly hard to relax anyway, but yeah, it is one of those experiences that can really remind you that you are a low-income family. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep the definition of a low-income family really simple, because I know we could argue statistics, we could compare different wage brackets, it might be different in different parts of the country, and also we know that if we compared, well, I know for us, if I compared my situation with the global community, I'm rich. I'm talking on a phone, under a roof, you're watching it on a screen, like these are riches, I know that. So for the sake of this video, after all those disclaimers, basically if you are a family that it seems like you have a significantly lower income than your immediate community, then some of this might sound familiar to you. And if you're not, or you maybe feel like you're about to enter into that state, then maybe this will give you a little bit of insight too. Before I go any further, and this is so important to me, so please remember this, if you forget everything else that I ramble on about, there is absolutely no shame in the low income game. There is no shame, no guilt, you are not at fault, it's not something to be embarrassed about. Even if you feel those things, those aren't true, there is no shame. Often the message comes across that if you are low income, then somehow you're poorly educated, or that you're lazy, or that you have made poor life choices. Not true. In fact, we know, I'm sure you can think immediately of very, very wealthy people who don't appear to be well educated, who appear to be lazy, and who make constant poor choices. It is not an indication of your moral standing if you have a low bank balance. Not at all. And it is not down to individual fault or blame. It is what it is. So please, feel no shame if you're a low-income family. I don't. So after that long preamble, I'm just going to summarize what the rest of this video is going to be about, because then if you need to, you can just skip along to the chapters along the bottom there. But basically I'm going to talk about 3 different areas, 3 kind of struggles, I guess, of a low-income family. And for each of those 3 things, I'm going to talk about 3 factors. I'm going to talk about just an honest reflection of what that's like for my lived experience. I'm not an expert, not a financial expert at all, but just sharing whatever I've experienced honestly. And then I'm going to hopefully bring a little bit of hope, and not in a toxic positivity way. I don't want to be like, look on the bright side, because it can be hard being a low-income family, but there are things that have brought me hope in that, so I was going to share those. And then the third thing is going to be hacks, and by hacks I don't mean 20 ways to feed your family for under £3.50. Other people are so much better than that than I am, so instead I'm going to more share some principles and some practices that have helped me with those different things. So the first thing is the mental and physical exhaustion that you can have when you're a low-income home educating family. And let me just talk honestly about my experiences. I want you to imagine the one appliance or the one product in your house that without it, if it broke or something happened to it, you would be lost. Like, you would be devastated and you'd be like, we've got to get a new one of these immediately. For us, when I was in a small flat and kids are in and out and you're eating kind of the same place where you're playing, and it was a vacuum cleaner. Like, that was a thing that would immediately make things seem clean and calm, and just brought me a little bit of like sense of peace in my head. But we were given a vacuum cleaner, and it, after a while, just did not work very well at all. And because we hadn't had the money to afford it in the first place, we certainly didn't have the money to just like immediately get a new one or to get it fixed. I just had to make do. And this might seem like a silly thing, but it's just a really practical way of explaining to you kind of what would be a 5-minute task in your house that would make you feel comfortable to have people over, or that would make you feel comfortable for your baby crawling around. For me, it became this big thing because I had to either get a dustpan and brush and sweep the whole carpet. I remember one time getting lint rollers and just trying to like pick up all the extra bits of fluff and so on from the carpet. Or if I used the Hoover, the vacuum cleaner, I used to have to like really push to get any kind of suction. And especially when I was pregnant, like that sucked, but it didn't actually suck up anything from the carpet. And so a 5-minute job becomes like a half-hour thing that you then have to repeat more often because it's not doing a very good job. So you're spending like an hour a day, or even just like the mental thought of having to do it, or maybe not feeling as comfortable for people to come over, or just like it's symbolic of the lots of little things like that can add up for a low-income family. You maybe can't afford to get the really convenient snacks. So for your kids to have snacks when you're going out or whatever, you've got to spend an extra 15 minutes each time making something from scratch and trying to reinvent the wheel a little bit every time that you do that, knowing that they probably won't eat it, and then that's another story. You don't have the convenient snacks that you can just pull out and save time that way. It's the extra planning that goes into everything. It's silly things like my kids love to get out and dirty and in the mud and so on. And so if we went out one day and we had a terrible washing machine and we didn't have a dryer, and we're in a flat with no kind of outdoor space. So if they got muddy with their clothes one day, and their coats, and we wanted to go out the next day and I still wanted them to be in warm coats, then I would have to calculate, well look, it takes me, I'm going to wash it, but then it's going to take me like 2 days for this to dry, so I can't arrange to meet anybody outside for the next 2 days. And that kind of thinking, it just gets tiring. Not to mention obviously the fact that you probably are going to have to be, someone in the house is going to have to work harder to earn more money, or you're often stressed out by trying to think of how paying for things and can you afford it. It's exhausting. That's just the honest truth. Now, is there any hope in that? No. Well, no, there's not. I don't think you can say like, oh, there's a bright side of that because fingers, muscles, Rachel, as you were hoovering up that carpet. No, there's a flaw in the system. It's wrong, it's hard, and it's tiring. But the hope that I take from it is that it taught me a lot, and it teaches me right now. We're still low income, just in a bigger place, and I have a dryer now. Is that it taught me about priorities and pace, which I think is absolutely golden for a home educating family. When we get our priorities right, when we can kind of fine tune, well, actually, we don't need to learn about that, and that thing that we thought was important in our kind of schooled brain, we can kind of throw those out the window and focus on what is really, really important. And I think that's really empowering for a home educating family. And if you have very limited energy, mental, physical energy, because of being a low-income family, then that skill that you learn of prioritizing where you're going to use that energy is really, really valuable. And then the pace, I think often, especially if you are new to home educating, you kind of want to go to everything. And if you've had the kind of what about socialization in your head, you think we've got to go to every meetup, we've got to do this, we've got to sign up for this and this and that. And the pace of life can get very rushed very quickly. And when you're tired, which can be for other reasons than being a low-income family, but when you're tired, you have to pace yourself accordingly. And that's something I'm still learning, but that's been very powerful for me, that I need to like schedule rhythms in that allow time for rest, that allow time for recuperation, and acknowledge the fact that it can be extra tiring. So are there any hacks for this? Well, like I said, scheduling is, I think, a low-income home educators family kind of secret weapon. If you know there's one day out where you're going to have a bus pass, for example, then you plan the things that you're going to do on that day, and then make sure the day before and the day after are restful days. If I know Tuesdays and Thursdays, there are quiet days, we're going to stay home, we're going to do our reading, we're going to catch up on some home ed stuff, I've already got those no's planned in if I'm tempted to expend a little more energy than I have, or if there's a group happening and it's on those days that I think, no, we need that rest. If you've already got those no's planned in, then I guess it takes back a little bit of that control that sometimes as a low-income family you feel like you lose. And that leads quite nicely on to my second point, which is the lack of control or the lack of choice that you can have as a low-income family. And home education is just another realm where you can feel that more. You can't necessarily choose the curriculums that you want, the resources that you want, the classes that you want to go to, the places that you want to visit. You have a lot of limitations put on you. And that's disappointing. It can feel guilty because you think like you're somehow stunting your children's growth. It can give a whole load of emotions. Frustration is another one. And even just the idea of, but if I had that, then that would solve this, this, and this, and this. And yeah, that's a lot of a burden to carry. So the hope in this for me, and this one could sound a little bit cheesy, but it definitely pushes me more to creativity. And I don't mean the creative ways of expressing yourself and so on, but in creative problem solving. It has really pushed me by necessity to solve problems creatively without spending money. Language arts is an area that definitely I wanted all the things, the books, the reading schemes, the lovely manipulatives, all of the different storytelling things, different schemes, curriculums, and they all come with really big price tags. So I had to think of systems for myself that didn't require a printer, because it's only the last 6 months I've had a printer, that didn't require purchasing special books. It just had to be things that I could get from the library or from a charity shop, that didn't need like a lot of phonics readers and all that type of thing. And it pushed me to find something that suited us without spending money. And that, a bit like before, it kind of fine-tuned my priorities in that too. So yeah, taking that time to, instead of going, oh, I've got this problem, let me just check on a website to see if I can buy a solution to that problem. Instead, it forces me to take that time between that A and that B and come up with option C, D, E. So yeah, it's definitely made me more creative. And I think that's had a brilliant knock-on effect to my children, because I want my children to be creative problem solvers. And also the kids, they're gonna say like, oh, we can just buy this. But I have noticed that my kids really have grown in like, oh, there's a way I could solve this problem. And that is, yeah, that's really lovely to see. And I think that's because I've had to develop that in myself too. So hacks or principles that can help us solve that lack of choice that being low income brings. I've said this before, but I think it's really worth repeating. What you don't spend in money, you will spend in time. So make sure that if you're doing creative problem solving to try and extend all of those choices, then make sure you invest that time wisely. I have sometimes spent hours and hours creating either physical resources or planning or thinking of, well, how can I do a system that matches that thing that I want that I can't afford? And it's ended up being worthless, that time that I've spent. And you don't want that when you feel like you have limited energy. Another thing that I think has been really helpful for me is that I used to, say as a teacher, if I was going to do the Romans or something like that, and I would pick a craft and then think, okay, what do I need for that craft? What resources do I need to get for that? And go out and get them. And instead now I look at the resources that I have and then think and plan crafts or activities from that. And that saves a lot of money, also pushes you to more creativity. And when you think, oh, I've got a limited choice because I can't do wax candles or some of these more expensive things, it forces that creativity, which is really great to model to our children. Another thing that I found really helpful is that I think sometimes comparison makes that lack of choice feel much more of a burden. And social media for me is where I get a lot of my ideas and community for home ed. And so sometimes, even though I might fully support somebody, I might recommend them to other people and so on, I might just have to mute their feed coming up because I would struggle seeing those things I want come and flash before me on the social media when I'm swiping across. And so if you can unfollow people, mute people, it's not a sign that you are not supporting them, it's a sign of doing what you need to limit the frustrations that lack of choice can give. Sometimes a lack of choice can come across in not being able to go to certain museums or certain meetups. And one thing that I've challenged myself quite a few times is I pick a particular bus route or a particular walking route and I research the heck out of it to try and work out what different events are along there, what parks are along there, what people can I meet along there. Is there anything along that route that we can just repeat the same route? And so it might be a limited choice, but we're trying to really deepen our understanding of that. So I know certain bus routes like the back of my hand. I know where the random little park is that you would miss if you didn't explore down that road. I know where there's the little museums or the libraries that you maybe might miss. I know the places where you can meet up with people, where you can get a cheap cup of tea, and those are the things that have really helped keep me more content when I have a lack of choice in the places that I can visit. So the third thing is the isolation that you can feel, and that can be very practical and tangible isolation, that you can't go out to meet people in the settings that they've chosen because you can't afford it. It could be the isolation of feeling like you're the only one that's having to do all of this. It could be the isolation of feeling like you're the only one saying, well, I can't afford that. And that can feel quite lonely as well if you're the only person advocating for budget-friendly things. Yeah, it can be lonely. So for me, one example does go back to that soft play. example that I gave at the beginning. When my kids were younger, so technically not home educating because they weren't school age, but the group of people that I was in community with were always at the soft play. That was their go-to, and it felt like a cheap break for them. And sometimes they'd be quite spontaneous about it as well. And spontaneity is the enemy of a low-income family, because spontaneity often means spending a lot more money. And that's how they got to know each other. That's how their kids got to know each other. That's the main way that, especially through those lonelier months, those colder months, that they would hang out. And I just could not access it at all. And then as well, I wasn't as confident enough to express that, or I didn't feel like it was a place that I could do that. And I even set up like, okay, well, every Thursday morning I'm going to commit to saying, this is open house. Anyone can come to my house with their kids, bring your own snacks, and I'll provide tea and toys. And yeah, it's just a long-standing invite to whoever. And every week I would do this. And there were many times when I'd get the house tidied up, I'd make sure like the kids' naps were arranged around it, I would make special activities for the kids coming, and no one turned up. And I'd be sat there in my very clean house thinking, okay. And that would happen again and again, because for the community that I was in, hanging out in someone's house and not spending any money, just like that didn't seem like a necessity. So if they could go to soft play where the kids could all be entertained and they could get out their house, like I understand why that's an attractive option. But yeah, it was a really, really lonely time. The hope for me is that I now have a community that I feel very at home in. Low-income families, not so low-income families, lower-income families. I found a community where it's just very common to be like, can't afford that, or oh, can we find a cheap way of doing that? And it's magical, it really is. Another thing it's taught me that gives me a lot of hope is about being vulnerable, because it was only in being vulnerable and open about being a low-income family, which again, there's no shame, so I shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about it. But that's what brought community, is being the like, oh, got this at the charity shop, or yeah, I don't have a car, so I can't afford to get the bus there, or yeah, the time that you've arranged that, it would mean that people would have to get taxis, and that could be quite expensive. So maybe being able to advocate for people because of being vulnerable about my own situation, that brings me a lot of hope, because as soon as you start, not always, if you're in a safe place to be able to share vulnerably with people about your situation, or where you don't feel that shame, then you pretty much always have somebody who says, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's how I feel too. And I love those moments, those Me Too moments, in the general sense of saying, yeah, I know how that feels, and that connection is really, really amazing. So my hack for that is, look, you don't have to give anyone an answer. You don't owe strangers anything. But in terms of building relationship with people that aren't strangers, then my hack is learning to say, I can't afford that, in a way that feels comfortable to you. It could be that you say, oh, that's not in our home ed budget right now, so we can't do that. So just having a phrase that opens up the floor to the fact that people don't all have the same income. And then creating a system of sharing, I think really helps with the isolation. For me, actually like being physically alongside someone, doing something to help them, that really helps me build community if I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety about that. So sharing and joining ways of sharing with other people might sound twee, but that really helps with the isolation. So it could be volunteering as a family as something that is going to help other people who are also low income. It could be a suggestion of, oh, at our home ed meetup, let's have a box, we'll call it a sharing box. And if you've got like wellies your kids have grown out of, or some worksheets that they didn't do, pop them in the box, and then each week we can just like have a look, and if it's something that you need, take it, and just have that culture of sharing, of hand-me-downs, of borrowing and lending. And my neighbours brought me around some snacks this afternoon. Our kids were playing outside. They brought me a lovely plate of snacks, and it was like the perfect timing because I'd been out too long with my kids, hadn't made a proper dinner, needed something to occupy them while I cooked something. And because I don't have those like convenient snacks I can necessarily pull out very easily, then that just made a world of difference to me and really helped with that isolation that you can sometimes feel in those moments of like, I wish I could order food in for this. So yeah, maybe not the easy hacks to go to. Maybe that means it don't count as hacks, I don't know, but being brave and sharing your experiences, but also sharing practically with other people and just having that as a habit, especially if you are not a low income family. Sharing and being willing to take from other people as well helps set that culture up. So wow, that was a long video, and I would apologise, except I'm not sorry. I love talking about this. We need to talk about it more, and if you've watched through to the end, then please let me know if you found anything helpful. Please share if you think other people would, and let's start a conversation, or let's continue the conversation. Join us in a Facebook group, find me on Instagram, all the details of that are below, and let's keep talking about this, and let's talk about it publicly so that other people can benefit from it. So yes, if you are feeling isolated, if you're feeling exhausted, if you are feeling just hemmed in from a lack of choice because you're a low income family, please know that all of those feelings are completely valid, but that there is hope, not that we win the lottery, but that you are not alone. There are plenty of people who are in the exact same situation who would love to talk to you about it. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you later. Take care.